The New Glenn rocket was on the launch pad undergoing a static fire test, a practice run where the engines are fired while the vehicle remains firmly attached to the ground. But then something went wrong, and the rocket exploded before it ever got the chance to launch. There's no doubt this setback will delay the program for months. But what if there's another way to look at it? What if this accident could actually open the door to a better future for New Glenn? A surprisingly smart solution that not many people are talking about. When daylight images are available, people finally see how much damage was done to the launch complex itself. The explosion appears to have destroyed one of the giant lightning towers and severely damaged another. These towers are important because they protect rockets and launch equipment from lightning strikes, and replacing structures that large is neither cheap nor quick. The transporter-erector, which is one of the most important pieces of ground equipment on the entire pad, also seems to have been destroyed. This structure is used to carry the rocket from the assembly building to the launch pad, raise it into a vertical position, support it before launch, and provide various connections such as power and fueling. Without it, New Glenn cannot be prepared for flight. The blast also appears to have damaged major concrete structures around the flame trench. The flame trench is designed to direct the rocket's exhaust away from the vehicle and the launch pad. If the trench flame diverter or water deluge system underneath it were damaged, repairs could take a very long time because these are massive pieces of infrastructure that are built to handle the extreme forces of a rocket launch. Blue Origin has only said that an anomaly occurred during the hot fire test and that all personnel are safe. Investigators will have to examine telemetry data, video footage, debris, and hardware to determine the root cause. It was a very rough day for Blue Origin. But the bigger issue is that this accident could create far more problems than many people initially realize. The most immediate impact is on Blue Origin's launch schedule. After putting its suborbital New Shepard program on the back burner last year to focus heavily on New Glenn and its lunar ambitions, the company now finds itself without an operational launch vehicle for the foreseeable future. This setback comes at a particularly bad time. Blue Origin was preparing to ramp up its launch cadence with plans to fly not only commercial satellite missions, but also several major lunar missions. Of course, we could spend hours talking about all the possible consequences of this explosion, but that's not really the point today. The goal is to understand what happened and what comes next, and how Blue Origin might move forward. Blue Origin's CEO Dave Limp recently said, "We've regained some access to Launch Complex 36 and are actively investigating the hot fire anomaly. We'll start clearing the pad soon and already have a solid rebuild plan in place. From the initial inspections, the booster and GS2s in the integration facility appear to be in good shape." That's honestly really encouraging to hear. It sounds like they're already making progress on the investigation and recovery efforts. The first step is obvious. Blue Origin will need to conduct a full mishap investigation to determine exactly what caused the failure. At the same time, the company now faces the enormous task of repairing or rebuilding Launch Complex 36. Initial reports suggest the damage was significant, with a lightning tower collapsing and the transporter-erector appearing to suffer major damage as well. Depending on the extent of the destruction, repairs could take many months. Once the root cause is identified, Blue Origin may also need to make hardware and procedural changes. That could include modifications to engine startup sequences, propellant loading operations, structural components, sensor systems, or other parts of the vehicle and ground equipment. Right now, it's simply too early to know. But perhaps the most interesting discussion emerging from this accident is whether it could actually accelerate Blue Origin's long-term plans. The reason is simple. If the launch pad has suffered catastrophic damage and major infrastructure needs to be rebuilt anyway, does it still make sense to rebuild everything around the current version of New Glenn? Some observers have suggested that Blue Origin could instead take this opportunity to move directly toward the larger 9x4 version of New Glenn that has reportedly been under development. The 9x4 variant would replace the current 7-engine first stage with 9 BE4 engines, significantly increasing the rocket's performance. According to Blue Origin's projections, the upgraded vehicle could carry more than 70 metric tons to low Earth orbit, over 14 metric tons directly to geosynchronous orbit, and more than 20 metric tons on missions toward the Moon. It would also feature a larger 8.7-meter payload fairing. Before the explosion, the most likely plan was to continue flying the current version of New Glenn while gradually introducing upgrades over time. But now, with critical ground infrastructure potentially destroyed, some people are asking a very simple question. If you're rebuilding everything anyway, why not rebuild it for the upgraded rocket? It's an interesting idea, but there are several reasons why that may not happen. First, Blue Origin still doesn't know what caused the explosion. Before making any major decisions about future vehicle upgrades, the company needs to complete its investigation. If the failure turns out to be related to the rocket itself, resources may need to be focused on fixing those issues before moving on to a more ambitious variant. Second, building a larger rocket is not as simple as adding 2 extra engines. A 9-engine New Glenn would likely require changes to the thrust structure, propellant plumbing, flight software, engine control systems, qualification testing, and potentially portions of the launch infrastructure itself. Even if the pad needs rebuilding, accelerating the upgrade could add years of additional engineering work. Third, Blue Origin already has customers waiting. Amazon needs launches for its satellite constellation, and NASA is counting on New Glenn for several future missions. If company leadership believes the quickest path back to flight is repairing the current vehicle and launch systems, that may be the option they choose. Another particularly interesting piece of the puzzle is the transporter-erector itself. If it has indeed been destroyed, Blue Origin will need to build a replacement regardless. That has led some observers to speculate that engineers could design a new transporter-erector capable of supporting both the current 7-engine rocket and a future 9-engine variant. That approach could allow Blue Origin to resume flights with the existing version of New Glenn, while quietly preparing the infrastructure needed for larger upgrades later on. For now, though, all of this remains speculation. Before any major decisions are made, Blue Origin first needs answers about what caused the explosion and just how much damage was done to the vehicle, the launch pad, and the surrounding infrastructure. The takeaway is that the explosion may have created a strategic choice for Blue Origin. They can either rebuild and return to flight as quickly as possible with the current New Glenn, or they can use the downtime to accelerate development of a larger, more capable version. Right now, there isn't enough information to know which path makes more sense. Anyway, whichever solution they ultimately choose, Blue Origin needs to move quickly. NASA has already awarded the company multiple launch contracts, including a mission scheduled for this fall that would send the Blue Moon Mark 1 lunar lander toward the moon. New Glenn is also expected to launch 2 additional lunar vehicles for NASA in the coming years. The challenge is that the damaged launch complex is currently Blue Origin's only operational launch site. The Blue Moon Mark 1 lander was designed around New Glenn's capabilities. While it could probably fit on a Falcon Heavy, it is difficult to imagine that actually happening given the technical, business, and political complications involved. Although the company is building a second launch pad at Cape Canaveral, that facility is still years away from being operational. And unlike airplanes, rockets cannot simply relocate to another available launch pad. Each launch site must be extensively modified and customized to support a specific launch vehicle. Perhaps the biggest concern is what this means for NASA's Artemis program. The Blue Moon mission, planned for later this year, was supposed to deliver several NASA payloads to the lunar surface, helping prepare for future robotic and human exploration missions. The impact could be even greater for Artemis 3. Under NASA's current plans, the mission is targeted for no earlier than late 2027 and will serve as a major test of the systems needed to return astronauts to the moon. NASA has contracts with both SpaceX and Blue Origin to develop lunar landing systems. Originally, SpaceX's Starship was expected to handle the first crewed lunar landings, but repeated delays opened the door for Blue Origin's Blue Moon lander to potentially become a serious alternative. Now, however, Blue Origin's path forward looks much more uncertain. If New Glenn remains grounded and Blue Moon cannot fly its planned missions, the company could effectively fall out of contention for Artemis 3. That would leave NASA increasingly dependent on SpaceX to keep its lunar exploration plans on schedule, making Artemis and America's return to the moon more reliant on a single provider than the agency originally intended. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman said that NASA is aware of the anomaly that occurred at Launch Complex 36 involving Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. He noted that spaceflight is never easy, and developing a new heavy-lift rocket is one of the most challenging tasks in aerospace. NASA will work closely with Blue Origin and other partners to support a full investigation, evaluate any potential impacts to upcoming missions, and help get the program back on track. For now, it's still too early to know exactly how much this event could affect Artemis or future lunar plans. NASA says it will provide updates on any impacts to the Artemis program and broader moon exploration efforts as more information becomes available. NASA's Moonbase 1 mission, currently targeted for late 2026, is now facing uncertainty. The mission is planned to use Blue Origin's Blue Moon Mark 1 Endurance lander to deliver several NASA payloads to the lunar surface. Among them are the stereo cameras for Lunar Plume Surface Studies instrument, which will examine how rocket exhaust interacts with lunar soil during landing, and the Laser Retroreflective Array, a device that allows orbiting spacecraft to determine their position more accurately by reflecting laser signals. The lander is expected to touch down near the Shackleton Connecting Ridge, where it will demonstrate technologies and operational capabilities designed to reduce risk for future crewed Artemis landings, planned for 2028. Beyond Moonbase 1, NASA's planned 2027 delivery of the Viper rover could now face additional uncertainty, depending on the outcome of the investigation and any resulting delays. If New Glenn experiences a lengthy stand-down, the effects could ripple into later lunar missions, including Artemis 4's crewed lunar landing, currently targeted for 2028. These missions are important because NASA wants to begin deploying Lunar Terrain Vehicles, or LTVs, as early as possible during the moon base buildup. Having these vehicles on the surface ahead of astronauts would allow NASA to test new technologies, map and study terrain hazards, move equipment and supplies, pre-position resources, and gain valuable operational experience before long-duration human missions begin. In short, every successful cargo mission helps lay the groundwork for a more sustainable human presence on the moon.